what the whole world, especially South Africans, have passionately and fervently prayed against has finally happened. Nelson Mandela has lost the battle against the terminal ailment which had confined him to his deathbed for 7 months, during which period he was subjected to intensive home-based Medicare. The stubborn ailment that did the final damage was diagnosed as an abdominal ailment associated with prostate cancer and lung infection. The news of Nelson Mandela's death, which did not completely come to the world as a surprise, was broken by South African President Jacob Zuma on Thursday, December 5th, 2013. A very rare gift from God to humanity, who epitomized such sterling qualities as servant leadership, self-denial, very high moral grounding, freedom fights for excellence, a titan, a colossus, and a celebrated citizen of the world. Nelson Mandela, though born in very ordinary circumstances on July 18, 1918 in Transkei, South Africa, offered extraordinary sacrifice for the sake of humanity. With the death of Nelson Mandela, who played a leading role in the drive for world peace, the entire world has lost one of the most towering figures. It is to the everlasting memory of Nelson Mandela that the apartheid system, which constitutes one of the worst forms of racial discrimination and horrors colonialism infected on Africans, that he had waged unrelenting war against it for 46 years, from 1948 before it was finally dismantled in 1994. For daring to lead the struggle against racial discrimination and a push for political equality for blacks all over the world, Nelson Mandela was jailed for 27 years and put in solitary confinement in Robben Island, South Africa. An internationally respected lawyer and winner of the Nobel Peace Prize in 1993 with former President F.W. de Klerk of South Africa, Nelson Mandela was the first black president that led the transition from white minority rule in the 1990s after serving his 27-year jail term. The South Africans have lost a founding father. Africa has lost a very dear son, influential, courageous, and world's hero of all times. Nelson Mandela worked tirelessly for the good of Africa and mankind. Nelson Mandela became the first black president of South Africa in 1992, but stepped down voluntarily in 1999 after having worked assiduously to bring South Africa, which was then a divided nation, together. One of the legacies which African leaders, especially those of them who have the sit-tight attitude tendencies, should learn from is the need to hand over power or leave the stage when the ovation is still loud, as demonstrated by Nelson Mandela, who defied all pleas for him to stay on as South African president after serving out his first 5-year tenure in 1999. A visionary leader, Nelson Mandela worked to see that cultural, economic, and political fortunes of Africa were on much firmer grounds, in tandem with his philosophy of an African continent which is at peace with itself all the time. Nelson Mandela saw racism not just as immoral, but wicked and devilish. Nelson Mandela retired from public life in 2004 at the age of 85, and his last public appearance was at the 2010 World Cup tournament, which was hosted by South Africa. Nelson Mandela, who is more popularly known in South Africa by his clan name of Madiba, rose from prison to presidency. After his release from prison, Nelson Mandela visited Nigeria in company with his then wife, Winnie Mandela, to express his gratitude to the then federal government under the administration of President Ibrahim Babangida. The special concert held to welcome Nelson Mandela to Nigeria, which took place at the National Stadium, Surulere, Lagos, and the Tafawa Balewa Square, featured performances by Sonny Okosun, Christy Esenigboke, and Onyeka Onwenu. Iken Nandaguba and I, Bisi Olatilo, had the singular privilege of performing as masters of ceremonies at that momentous event, which gave us the opportunity to operate at very close quarters to Nelson Mandela, memories of which will be etched in a special place in my heart forever. In fact, will be an integral part of my memoirs. Without any doubt at all, Nelson Mandela was the emancipator of the black race. He helped to bury the myths and stereotypes that tended to denigrate the status of the black man in the eyes of the world. Meanwhile, reports reaching us say top hotels and rental vehicles in Johannesburg and Cape Town have been booked out ahead of the grand burial of Nelson Mandela as dignitaries prepare to converge in South Africa for the great event. Arrangements are in top gear by the BCL Atila Show to bring our viewers across the globe the coverage of the burial of Nelson Mandela. Remember, we did the same during the World Cup in 2010. As the whole world gears up for the beginning of the final farewell for Nelson Mandela, which began with his lying in state at the Union Buildings in Pretoria, South Africa, between Wednesday and Friday this week, and a memorial service for him, which will culminate in the state burial in his own place, Kunu, on Sunday, 15th of December 2013. The BCL Atila Show wishes Nelson Mandela, the world's hero of all times, a most peaceful sojourn in the hereafter.